Different people can experience homelessness in different ways, which is why they need different kinds of help. One example is a social enterprise for young adults trying to break the cycle with help from transitional employment at a cafe in Boston called Breaktime. To tell us about the effort and how it's been changed in response to the pandemic are Breaktime's co-founders and co-executive directors, Schoen and Tony Shu. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank
I
you,
want to
Chris.
start with Connor and Tony. Please, continue the thread if necessary. This story begins when the two of you were students at Harvard, and what got you focused on this in the first place?
Yeah, so Tony and I were freshmen at the time we first met, and we were working at a shelter called Y2Y that serves specifically 18 to 24-year-olds experiencing homelessness. So, at the time we were working with people our own age, getting to know what their experience was like. And as we were both working at this shelter, we created really good bonds with the people there. And for myself, I was actually coming out at the time and kind of grappling with everything involved in figuring out your own identity. And the biggest source of support and encouragement I received was actually from the young people at that shelter. 40% of young adults experiencing homelessness, according to the True Colors Fund, identifies LGBTQ+. So, a significant percentage of this population are people that have been kicked out of their homes purely because of the way they identify, and that's why they're homeless. And then they're stigmatized, it becomes harder to get a job. So I sympathized a lot with this population, and also these young people encouraged me to be more accepting of myself and my own identity and to embrace who I truly am. So I feel such a debt of gratitude to these young people. And ever since freshman year, when I met Tony at the shelter, I've wanted to spend every day relentlessly advocating for these amazing individuals.
And when Connor and I were at the shelter, we spoke with the guests and just asked them what they were thinking about, what they were looking for. And we learned that the number one thing they wanted was job, stable employment. And that was actually one of the most biggest challenges they had, was finding stable and maintaining stable employment. And we learned that in order to achieve stable housing, stable employment is actually the most critical factor. And so when we thought about what are ways we can support this population in sustainable as well as in impactful ways, we wanted to focus on learning more about the puzzle of homelessness and employment. And for me, the reason why this issue was so important was mostly because of my mother. And I was raised by a single mother in Massachusetts who immigrated to the United States as a young adult. And when she first came here, not having a strong community or a stable job, for many nights slept in the back of her car. And it wasn't until she got her first chance at a Chinese restaurant, working minimum wage, at her first job, it wasn't until then that she really began seeing herself as being able to support herself and really got her first chance at really launching a career. And so when we think about kind of the work that we're doing, we understand that stable employment, that first chance at stable employment, can have ripple effects on someone's entire career, but also on the generations to come.
Oh, now that you brought up this personal story, Tony, there is a difference, I think, between people coming out and going through the difficulty if they have a lot of safety nets with them. But if you don't have those safety nets, what does that mean?
Right. If you don't have those safety nets, it's very, very difficult, to kind of get back on your feet. And I think we see, more than 70% of people who do experience homelessness report that they face discrimination by employers. And that can be for a large number of reasons, but I think just those statistics show the difficulty, these young adults and people experiencing homelessness in general face in reclaiming that sense of stability. And so we wanted to design a program and an organization that really, provides not only a community of love and support, but offers clear pipelines and pathways to rejoining the workforce and allowing these young adults to actually put their talents into practice.
Yeah, and to add
Connor,
to that, Chris.
Break time is part of a larger puzzle, as Tony put it, and you have a transitional employment program, at least the way it was originally designed. So what would be happening in that year or so of transition for people in the program?
Yeah, just to quickly add on something Tony was saying, and I'll answer that question. One of the most major contributors to young adult homelessness is actually family conflict. So family conflict and conflict with roommates that these young adults are living with, is something that really sparks homelessness for a lot of young people and causes them to be left without resources, left without support, left without any sense of community. And then they're immediately stigmatized as a group that doesn't have the potential and the power to do amazing things. So what we're really trying to do is also refine in people's minds how they look at this population. Because if any of us are left behind and forgotten and kicked out of our homes, it doesn't say anything about our potential and our power to do great things. So that's one thing I want to emphasize, adding on what Tony was saying. And then in terms of how it informs the structure of our program, getting to your question, Chris, we really believe that there are some fundamental building blocks to being a great employee, that if you have very supportive parents who have worked full-time their whole lives, like my parents, who can teach you these skills, that's awesome. But if you don't have that, unfortunately, these things don't come natural. So, the first time you have a job, you got to get used to the 9-to-5 flow of things. You've got to get used to what full-time looks like. You've got to get used to what communication with your employer versus your friend looks like. All of these things don't just come naturally to people. These are things that are socialized values. They're norms of professionalism that we've developed as a society. They're not like human instincts. So we have to coach these skills and provide people with an actual job opportunity, a good paying job opportunity where they're practicing these skills in real life. Because just talking about professionalism, just talking about showing up to work on time doesn't ingrain those habits. So with our transitional employment program, we initially had the intention of just doing 1 year. We're now allowing people to join us and kind of embrace the timeline that makes most sense for them based on their situation, whether that's someone who just needs 3 months of transitional employment before jumping into college or jumping into another job, or someone who needs a job with break time for a longer period of time. So that's kind of how we're rethinking our programming and restructuring it based on all of the fluctuations and all of the instability we're seeing during this really hard time.
Tony, talk about the hard time, because sit-down business at cafes, it's on hold, but you're doing other things. So what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, our original goal was opening Breaktime Cafe by this spring, and we were actually on track to do that with the team, the funding, the partners in place. But because of the pandemic, we've had to put pause on the opening and reassess when it makes sense to do that. But we know that the pandemic only exacerbates the challenges that the young adults we work with face, as well as the challenges our broader community faces. And so when we thought about our work, we could not just sit back and wait for things to pass. We had to, take a look and take stock of what are the resources, the partners, the communities that we do work with, and how can we mobilize that to address the needs of right now. And so our goal as an organization was always to build off of the work that other nonprofits are doing. And so when we think about transitional employment, our goal was actually to work with young adults who were coming out of very foundational work training programs and providing them with additional actual employment to put their skills into practice. And so when the pandemic happened, we talked to one of our closest partners, Community Work Services, who we were going to work with for the cafe. And they had a culinary training program that was operating at a much lower capacity because of the pandemic. And we also realized that our community, both in terms of frontline healthcare workers, shelter workers, and food insecure populations, all have a need for ready-to-go, nutritious, hot meals. And so over the past few weeks, about a month and a half, we pivoted our organization to launch the Breaktime Double Impact Initiative, which essentially has two purposes: to create employment for the young adults we work with. We're creating full-time job opportunities at a living wage, as well as be able to feed and serve our broader community, these frontline healthcare workers, these communities in crisis, to help them get through this.
Connor, pivot is a very smooth word, but what did it feel like when the two of you put all this time and trouble into developing this program, and the people you were trying to help? What did it feel like for them? All of a sudden, this has to be done differently.
Yeah, Chris, it definitely wasn't the smoothest and easiest transition at first, but ultimately, Tony and I identify as action-driven optimists. We really see ourselves as innovators, but also people who see a better future for our world, a better new normal, quote unquote. So as we approached the shifting dynamics of what was going on, we were trying to think as creatively as possible as what we could do. And ultimately, the core components of our model are this job creation piece and this piece of creating community that's going to support young people, make them feel like they have security, like they have support. So as we were launching the Double Impact Initiative, what we realized is everything that the cafe embodies can come about in a different way. So we had been working with an incredible organization called Community Work Services. We partnered with their culinary training program to get some of the young adults we work with culinary skills before they start working at the cafe in a more second step entrepreneurial opportunity. So we already had young people going through that program, working in that kitchen. So once the pandemic started, I reached out to the chef and we started talking about everything going on. And what we realized is we would have been creating food in that kitchen to send downstairs to sell in our cafe. The kitchen's in the same building as the cafe. Why don't we pivot the production and send it out towards community members and get funding to donate these meals to local community groups and local individuals and families who are in need of this support. For us, at first it felt like, oh, we have to make huge changes. Like this is, going to disrupt everything. But what we realized is even in the course of the pandemic, we still can create job opportunities and create value to society at the same time. And we can also create a sense of purpose and community for our young people. I think even more so than the cafe, this Double Impact Initiative has been awesome because all the young people we work with, the 10 amazing young people we've been able to get full-time, good-paying jobs, they come into work and they're so excited about the ability to create meals that day to serve people in their own home communities across Boston, in Everett, in Chelsea, communities hit very hard by COVID-19. To feel empowered, to feel like they can have an impact is huge. So I think there's an element of this model that goes even beyond what we were looking for with the cafe. So even the structure looks a bit different. I think the ethos of the model, the foundational elements of how we're operating are still the same. They're just directed in a slightly different direction.
Well, we should finally mention that if anybody needs some help from your program or wants to help you carry on your mission, what's the best way to follow up and get more information?
Yeah, please visit us at www.breaktime.org. And so our contact information is all there, and there's ways to support us both in our meals program, but we've actually recently launched a professional cleaning and disinfection service. And so if you run a business or an office or a restaurant and require these services, definitely reach out to us and we can both support you as well as create job opportunities for the young adults we work with.